Hi everyone, Rush the Knee Fast Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new ScHoolboy Q album, Blue Lips. Yep, 6th full-length LP from California-based rapper, songwriter, lyricist, Mr. ScHoolboy Q, one of the long-beloved artists who is signed to the West Coast hip-hop powerhouse that is Top Dog Entertainment, home to J-Rock, SZA, Ab-Soul, at one point Kendrick Lamar, and many others. Early on in the 2010s, the label and its biggest artists were seen like they were a closely knit collective, but over the years it became clearer just how different the personal and artistic journeys of each person on TDE was. Specifically in the case of Q here, you could say a lot of his catalog has been devoted to reviving many of the classic tropes and themes of gangster rap, but with a very out there and experimental edge. You can hear it in the forward-thinking production on Oxymoron, or the character-driven narratives and psychedelic sound play of Blank Face. There are points where I have been in vast disagreement with the ScHoolboy Q fan base in terms of like what the highs and lows of his catalog are, but I think his first major universal misstep came in the form of Crash Talk in 2019, which not only featured some of his weakest songwriting yet, but anything creatively weird or daring that made his previous records interesting was just nowhere to be found. Going from the very dense Blank Face to something as scant and as undercooked as Crash Talk was kind of like getting a bucket of ice water thrown in your face. Thankfully though, with Blue Lips, ScHoolboy seems to be back in his experimental bag, as there's a lot of tracks, a lot of runtime, a lot of changes, and a lot of effects on this record that I think Blank Face fans will appreciate. I'm even liking this album a lot myself, despite not being the biggest supporter of Blank Face. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One, I think ScHoolboy is doing a better job at bringing some methodology to his madness on this record. And the more personal angle a lot of the tracks on this LP take makes the project overall just a lot more down to earth, with a lot of moments on this project showing Q in one breath delivering sentimental feelings about his life, his loved ones, his past, his trauma as well. And then that clashes with the sheer emotional and mental chaos he's dealing with in his mind at any given time. It's very much a war in his own mind, where sometimes his desires or the rules of his way of life prior to becoming famous get the better of him. And this back and forth plays out across a totally out of control track list that never really settles on one idea or feeling or vibe for too long, which, yes, kept me on my toes across the record, but simultaneously made it difficult to kind of dig too deeply into any one central idea or feeling. The tone for that, in a way, I think is set up pretty well by the intro cut, which is very washed out. It's repetitive, it's trippy, doesn't have much in the way of direction or definition, which again I think is fitting because the record to follow to a slight degree is kind of a mess. Contrast this with the closing track, Smile, which is kind of a playful cut in 6/8 time, where after everything that transpires up until this point, Q is heard sounding absolutely carefree, with a smile on his face, melodies in his flows, and then the whole track just ends abruptly shortly after a minute with Q saying, "That's it," which makes it kind of short and unfulfilling as a final moment, because really, what's the takeaway here? What was this all for? I don't know if there's an answer. I don't know if there's really supposed to be. If anything, I think what we've been given with Blue Lips is just a snapshot of Q's mind and mentality currently. No more, no less. Because I get the sense that this intro track and outro track really kind of bookend what is an emotional fever dream of sorts for Q, where it becomes clear that present day he's leading a very different life than he was 15 years ago. And this album kind of becomes a place to be able to reflect on that and plug back into a side of him that maybe he isn't as close to anymore. Not as close to, but is still very much there and alive. It's very much a there are two wolves living inside you type situation. I think we hear one of those wolves on a track like Pop, the first full proper song on the record featuring Rico Nasty, where the record instantly goes from 0 to 100, bringing this sound that is almost ultra edgy Odd Future circa 2011 with some punk rock energy coming off of the guitar samples in the cut. The beat is wild, the energy is off the charts, which I mean you should expect from any song that would bring a Rico Nasty feature onto it. It's so unbridled in its rage, I'm not even sure Q and Rico are caring all that much about their lyricism on this track. Most of Rico's feature or appearance on the song is her just like, you know, kind of throwing out this pop refrain over and over and over and over. I wish there were more bars to it, but again, I think this track is just really more about explosivity. So yeah, that's one vibe, that's one energy of the record. We hear a combination of the album's two main emotional vibes on the following Thank God For Me, where you get these passages of woozy, dizzying, slow-mo jazz rap that instantly transitions into some hype trap shit. Very Watch the Throne-esque to a degree, with lots of animated, in-your-face, aggressive vocal layers and ad-libs. And we switch back and forth between these two gears across the song, very successfully, I might add. Big contrasts, big transitions, and yet it's still a really cohesive song at the end of the day. Really the first handful of songs on the record, Pop, Thank God For Me, and Blue Slides, kind of gives you the main emotional range of the record, as the last of those three brings us a really emotional, introspective piece of jazz rap where ScHoolboy is talking about the ways in which his life has changed. There's a pretty clear Mac Miller nod at one point too. The track overall is very affirmational. It's almost a Lord's Prayer of sorts. Now, as far as the 13 tracks from here are concerned, the quality varies based upon the amount of structure, consistency, the beats, the clarity, the writing. Urine 101 I did enjoy quite a bit as a single. To me, this track is classic Q in so many ways. It is slick street poetry matched with a completely out there and very unlikely groove on the production side. I just love how Q continues to be drawn toward the sorts of beats and the sorts of rhythms that your average rapper just would not touch, especially somebody who typically dabbles in the sorts of topics and lyrical focuses that he does. Now, listening to this song in comparison with many others on this record, I did come to feel like it could have used a bit more contrast or transition points across its runtime. It is a little one note, and the tensity of the song, the building tensity of it across its runtime, kind of feels like it's heading toward a climax that never quite happens. So I'm not as in love with it upon more listens, and it ends up being one of a handful of tracks on this record that I think could have used more length, more development. The interlude type moments like Nunu are an example. Also the song Movie, the closing track that I mentioned earlier. But a lot of the time we are getting tracks on this LP that are well structured, well written, and display a certain kind of chaos raging within them, like Lovebirds featuring Devin Malik and Lance Skywalker, which is this experimental, jarring, constantly changing ode to love, lust, romance, and desire. To put it more bluntly, it's like we're shifting back and forth between a more tender side and a full-on horny brain side, marked with lovely, serene, drippy soul passages, but then also just like industrial trap filth. But working with pieces of tracks that are so disparate in vibe and style doesn't always pan out in Q's favor, though. Case in point, the song Ohio featuring Freddie Gibbs, which in my opinion is just like this three-part slop piece with demonic chipmunk raps, kind of a cloudy G-funk passage, and then some moody jazz rap on the last leg where we finally get Freddie Gibbs. We are kind of waiting for him forever on this track, and his appearance is lyrically kind of average for his standards. Like, it's not a terrible track overall, but it's so long-winded and there's not a whole lot of momentum being carried from one portion of the track to the next. It's just kind of a slog to listen to, and I don't see myself coming back to it. And again, it's weird and unfortunate just how ham-fisted and awkward the progression of a song like this is, especially considering, by contrast, FOUX featuring Ab-Soul goes over so well. As this track is even weirder, but somehow more cohesive. It sounds like a sex and drug-fueled nightmare over super choppy, rough beats that most rappers aren't touching, experimental, mainstream, or, I don't know, a secret third thing. There's also a lot of well-executed contrast 2 on the song First, where we get these deep-voiced, shouty refrains over some eerie production. It kind of sounds like a trap Death Grips, and it's strange that a track like this contains so much fire, so much aggression, but then simultaneously on the back end, a lot of deep emotional and mental clarity as Q explores the more introspective pockets of his mind, which we get a more thorough taste of on other songs on the back end of this LP, like Lost Times or Germany 86, which calls back to his birthplace, his parents' divorce. It really ends up being an ode to his mother who raised him, as well as an intense snapshot of his youth and a lot of formative experiences too. And on the song Time Killers, time also becomes a strong theme, because I guess as Q is getting up there in age, he's not only mourning the time that he's felt he's lost up until this point, but also trying to fight against and ignore things that could kill or waste his time today. So again, with this trio of tracks I've just mentioned, Passage of Time, this kind of being a new and different phase of Q's life, this becomes a pretty clear focus. And with it being one of the biggest themes of the record in this way, you have to kind of imagine that this is also influencing a lot of the other material on the album. It's connected to all of it in some way, especially with a lot of the more aggressive vibes and lyrics on this record referencing back to a time in his life that has long passed, be that Back in Love, or be that the militaristic, surreal cop death rager Pig Feet. And that's not to say that Q's heart or his mind isn't like fully in these sorts of tracks. Like, obviously it certainly is, but there's definitely a point of separation there between this younger, more rash, more inexperienced self that he's rapping from the standpoint of on this record, and this, you know, new, more mature version of himself that actually has like something to lose now, considering how far he's come. Sometimes you're getting one side of that coin, sometimes the other, sometimes an ill-defined combination of both. And it makes the album interesting and certainly unique to any other project in Q's discography. But where I think this record falls a little short is that it doesn't really kind of dive into this dichotomy deeply enough. Like, it's clearly there, it's clearly inspiring the tension that is absolutely deafening throughout this entire record, but it's not explored or dug into explicitly enough for, I think, the listener, or even Q to an extent, to glean anything super substantive or deep out of it. In fact, I think if the closing track displays anything, it's very much an ignorance is bliss mindset in terms of just not really untangling this entire mess, which ends up making this dichotomy feel less like a formal central theme and more like an elephant in the room. So unfortunately, because of that, I think there is some incredible and amazing conceptual potential to this record that goes very much untapped. But even with that not being illustrated to the degree that it could have been, this is still a very good album from ScHoolboy Q. Some of his best and most interesting song ideas, instrumental experiments, and verses turn up on this record. And for sure, at age 38, ScHoolboy Q still has loads of creative ideas, lots of gas left in the tank, and there's absolutely no reason to believe that he is anywhere near past his creative prime. I'm feeling a decent to strong 7 on this record. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, ScHoolboy Q, forever.